The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace as President Donald Trump's motorcade approached the grand gates. Inside the black limousine, Trump adjusted his red tie and checked his appearance in the window's reflection. This was meant to be a historic moment, a formal state visit that would strengthen the relationship between America and Britain. Sarah Mitchell, a veteran reporter for BBC News, positioned herself among the crowd of journalists gathered behind the metal barriers. She had covered dozens of royal events, but something felt different today. The usual excitement in the air seemed mixed with tension. Palace staff moved with quick, nervous steps, and even the tourists seemed to sense that this wasn't going to be an ordinary day. The royal guard, stationed at the main entrance, stood perfectly still, their red uniforms pristine and their tall black hats casting shadows over their faces. Among them was Sergeant James Wellington, a decorated soldier who had served the crown for 15 years. His military record was spotless, his dedication unwavering. He had guarded the palace through countless state visits, always maintaining the highest standards of military protocol. As Trump's limousine pulled through the gates, palace officials rushed to ensure everything went smoothly. The president stepped out of the vehicle, his confident smile ready for the cameras. He straightened his suit jacket and looked around at the magnificent architecture of the palace. This was his moment to show strength and diplomacy on the world stage. The crowd of reporters pressed forward, cameras clicking rapidly. Sarah noticed the tension in the security team's faces. Even the usually calm palace spokesman seemed more alert than usual. Something was brewing beneath the surface of this carefully choreographed event. Trump began his walk toward the palace entrance, flanked by Secret Service agents and British security personnel. His steps were measured, presidential. He had practiced this moment, knowing that every gesture would be analyzed by media outlets around the world. The relationship between America and Britain had faced challenges recently, and this visit was meant to repair any damage. As he approached the line of royal guards, Trump's military training from his youth kicked in. He had always respected the military, despite never serving himself. The sight of these elite soldiers in their ceremonial uniforms impressed him. These were men who had dedicated their lives to protecting the monarchy and serving their country. Sergeant Wellington watched the approaching president through his peripheral vision. His training had taught him to remain completely still during ceremonial duties, but his mind was active. He thought about his recent deployment to Afghanistan, where he had lost close friends. He remembered the promises politicians had made to veterans that were never kept. The weight of his rifle felt familiar in his hands. The morning breeze rustled through the trees in the palace gardens. Tourists continued taking photos, unaware of the complex emotions and protocols playing out before them. Children pointed excitedly at the guards, amazed by their stillness and discipline. Parents explained the importance of tradition and ceremony in British culture. Trump's advance team had briefed him on the proper protocols for interacting with the Royal Guard. They had explained that these soldiers were not just for show, they were active military personnel with real weapons and serious responsibilities. The president nodded along during the briefing, confident in his ability to handle any social situation. As the moment of encounter grew closer, palace officials held their breath. Years of planning had gone into this visit. Trade deals, diplomatic relationships, and international stability all hung in the balance. The smallest mistake could create headlines around the world and damage carefully built relationships between two of the world's most powerful nations. Trump's footsteps echoed against the ancient stones as he drew nearer to the line of royal guards. His eyes swept across their faces, searching for any sign of recognition or acknowledgement. These soldiers represented everything he admired about military tradition, discipline, honor, and unwavering loyalty. In his mind, he was about to share a moment of mutual respect between leaders and those who serve. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her camera lens, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Her years of experience covering political events had taught her to watch for subtle signs that others might miss. The way the palace staff exchanged glances, the slight shift in the guards' positioning, the unusual silence from the crowd, all pointed to a moment that could define this entire visit. Sergeant Wellington's thoughts drifted to his younger brother, who had been injured in Iraq while serving under American command. The doctors said he would never walk normally again. Letters to politicians asking for better veteran support had gone unanswered. The promises of care and respect for military families had proven empty. These memories burned in his mind as he maintained his rigid posture. The president approached. The first guard in line, a young soldier named Private Thomas Clark. Trump's face lit up with what he believed to be appropriate presidential warmth. He had always prided himself on his ability to connect with military personnel, even though his own relationship with the armed forces had been complicated throughout his career. The sound of cameras clicking filled the air as photographers captured every angle of the president's approach. Social media teams from both governments prepared to share images that would reach millions of people within minutes. This moment would be analyzed, discussed, and remembered long after the visit ended. Trump raised his right hand in what he intended, as a respectful salute. His posture straightened, and his expression became solemn. This wasn't just a photo opportunity for him. It represented his respect for military service and international cooperation. He expected the traditional response that would complete the ceremonial exchange. Private Clark, following his training and protocols, remained perfectly still. His eyes looked straight ahead, seeing nothing and everything at the same time. The young soldier had been briefed extensively about maintaining proper behavior during state visits. Any deviation from protocol could end his career and embarrass the crown. The president's salute hung in the air, waiting for acknowledgement that didn't come. Seconds passed like hours. The cameras continued clicking, but the expected response never materialized. Trump's confident expression began to show the first signs of confusion. This wasn't how these moments typically played out. Palace officials watched nervously from their positions around the courtyard. They knew that every second of this interaction was being recorded and would be scrutinized by political analysts around the world. The relationship between America and Britain could be affected by what happened in the next few moments. Sergeant Wellington observed the scene developing before him. He was next in line, and he could see the growing tension in the president's posture. The soldier's military training told him to maintain protocol, but his personal feelings about American foreign policy and treatment of veterans created an internal conflict that threatened his professional composure. Trump lowered his hand slowly, his salute unacknowledged. He tried to maintain his presidential demeanor, but confusion was clearly visible on his face. This had never happened to him before during a military ceremony. He looked around for guidance from his staff, but they were as surprised as he was by the guards' lack of response. The crowd of tourists began to notice that something unusual was happening. Whispers spread through the gathered onlookers as they tried to understand why the ceremonial exchange seemed to be going wrong. Children asked their parents what was happening, but the adults had no answers to give. The tension in the courtyard became thick enough to cut with a knife as Trump moved to the next guard in line. His jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his presidential composure. Years of dealing with difficult situations in business and politics had taught him to push forward even when things didn't go as planned. He refused to let this moment define his visit to Britain. Sergeant Wellington watched the president approach his position. The veteran soldier's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. His oath to the crown demanded perfect military behavior, but his personal experiences with American foreign policy had left deep scars. Friends had died in wars that seemed to benefit politicians more than the people they claimed to protect. Sarah Mitchell zoomed in with her camera, her reporter's instincts telling her that she was witnessing something extraordinary. The other journalists around her seemed to sense it too. Phones were quickly pulled out to record video, and notebook pages were filled with rapid observations. This wasn't the routine ceremonial coverage they had expected. The palace's head of protocol, Sir Richard Thornbury, felt sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the cool morning air. He had orchestrated hundreds of state visits during his 30-year career, but nothing had prepared him for this situation. The careful choreography of international diplomacy was falling apart before his eyes. Trump stopped directly in front of Sergeant Wellington and raised his hand in another salute. This time his gesture was more deliberate, more commanding. He looked directly into the guard's eyes, something that broke traditional protocol but showed his determination to get some form of acknowledgement. The president's face carried a mixture of authority and growing frustration. Wellington felt the president's gaze boring into him. For a moment, the soldier's perfect military posture wavered almost imperceptibly. The weight of his personal history, his brother's injuries, the empty promises from politicians, and his duty to the crown all collided in his mind. His training screamed at him to remain still, but his heart pounded with emotions that had been buried for years. The cameras captured every detail of this unprecedented moment. The President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, was being ignored by a British soldier. Political commentators would later analyze this scene frame by frame, searching for meaning in every facial expression and body language cue. Queen Elizabeth II watched from a palace window, her experienced eyes taking in the situation developing in her courtyard. At 99 years old, she had seen countless political dramas unfold. Her wisdom told her that this moment would have consequences far beyond what anyone present could imagine. The delicate balance of international relationships was shifting. Before her eyes, Trump's salute remained raised for what felt like an eternity. The silence grew so profound that individual camera clicks could be heard across the courtyard. Even the pigeons seemed to sense the gravity of the situation and remained unusually quiet. The normal sounds of London traffic faded into background noise. Sergeant Wellington's internal struggle intensified with each passing second. His military training had been drilled into him through years of service. He had never failed to follow orders or maintain proper protocol. But standing before him was a man who represented policies that had cost him friends and damaged his family. The soldier's hands remained firmly at his sides. Palace staff began exchanging worried glances and subtle hand signals. Security teams moved slightly closer to their assigned positions, not expecting violence but preparing for any possibility. The carefully planned schedule for the day was already falling behind, and no one knew how to salvage the situation. The president's secret. Service detail watched the scene with professional alertness. They had protected Trump through countless unpredictable situations, but this was unlike anything in their training manuals. Their job was to protect the president from physical threats, not diplomatic embarrassment, but they remained ready to act if needed. Trump finally lowered his hand for the second time, his salute once again unacknowledged. His face now showed clear signs of irritation, though he tried to maintain his presidential demeanor for the cameras. He had built his career on projecting strength and control, and this situation was testing both qualities to their limits. The moment stretched on like a taut wire ready to snap as Trump stood before Sergeant Wellington. The president's eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time since arriving at the palace, his carefully maintained composure began to crack. This wasn't just about military protocol anymore. It was about respect, power, and the complex web of international relationships that could be damaged by a single gesture. Wellington's mind flashed back to his brother's hospital bed, to the wheelchair that had become a permanent part of their family's life. He remembered the politicians who had promised support for wounded veterans, the same politicians who cut funding when the cameras weren't rolling. His jaw clenched almost imperceptibly, a tiny movement that only someone looking very closely would notice. Sarah Mitchell's camera captured the subtle interplay of emotions crossing both men's faces. She realized she was documenting a moment that would be studied by historians and political scientists for years to come. The image of the president's unacknowledged salute would become iconic, representing something much larger than a simple ceremonial snub. British Prime Minister's office had representatives watching from discreet positions around the courtyard. They understood immediately that this incident would dominate news cycles for weeks and potentially affect trade negotiations, military cooperation agreements, and the special relationship between their countries. Damage control planning was already beginning in their minds. Trump took a deep breath and made a decision that surprised everyone present. Instead of moving on to the next guard, he remained in front of Wellington. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet enough that only the soldier could hear him clearly. The words carried weight that went beyond typical diplomatic pleasantries. "I respect your service, soldier," Trump said, his tone softer than his usual public-speaking voice. "I know. You've seen things that most people can't imagine. I know you've sacrificed more than most people ever will." The president's words carried genuine feeling, a rare moment of personal connection breaking through the political theater. Wellington's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected personal address. No one had briefed him about the possibility of the president speaking directly to him. His training hadn't covered this scenario. For a moment, the soldier's rigid military bearing wavered as he processed the human moment happening within the formal ceremony. The crowd of journalists leaned forward, trying to catch any words being exchanged. Microphones were adjusted, and cameras zoomed in, but the conversation remained private between the two men. The intimate nature of their exchange created an island of quiet communication in the midst of the public spectacle. Palace officials watched nervously, unsure whether this deviation from protocol was making the situation better or worse. Sir Richard Thornberry consulted his clipboard, but no written procedure covered what to do when a foreign head of state began having personal conversations with the royal guard during a formal ceremony. Wellington felt something shift inside him as he heard the sincerity in the president's voice. The man standing before him wasn't just a political figure or a symbol of policies he disagreed with. He was a human being trying to make a connection. The soldier's internal conflict deepened as his personal feelings battled with this unexpected moment of genuine respect. Trump continued speaking, his words careful and measured. "I've made mistakes. Every leader does. But I want you to know that I see you, and I honor what you've done for your country." The president's admission of fallibility was unprecedented in such a public setting, even though only Wellington could hear the actual words. The veteran soldier's mind raced with conflicting emotions. His brother's injuries, his lost friends, the broken promises from politicians, all of these grievances remained real and painful. But standing before him was a man showing genuine respect for his service and sacrifice. The simple humanity of the moment cut through years of built-up resentment. Camera shutters continued clicking as photographers documented every micro-expression and subtle movement. Political analysts watching live television feeds were already crafting theories about what was happening during this extended interaction. The unprecedented nature of the scene was creating its own historical significance. Wellington's hand began to move slowly toward his temple, the beginning of what could become a return salute. The movement was barely perceptible at first, but trained observers could see the soldier's internal struggle playing out in his body language. Years of military discipline fought against personal convictions in a battle that would define this moment forever. The world seemed to hold its breath as Sergeant Wellington's hand moved with agonizing slowness toward his temple. Every eye in the courtyard was fixed on this single motion that carried the weight of international diplomacy, personal conviction, and military honor. The soldier's face remained stoic, but the internal battle raging within him was reflected in the slight tremor of his fingers. Trump watched the guard's hand rise inch by inch, understanding that he was witnessing something profound. This wasn't just about protocol or ceremony anymore. It was about one soldier's struggle between duty, personal beliefs, and the complex realities of international service. The president remained perfectly still, respecting the gravity of the moment. Sarah Mitchell held her breath as she adjusted her camera focus. She realized that whether Wellington completed his salute or not, this moment would define both men's legacies in ways they couldn't yet understand. The photograph she was about to take would appear on front pages around the world and be referenced in history books for generations. The silence in the courtyard had become so complete that the sound of Wellington's uniform brushing against itself as he moved seemed amplified. Even the usual palace sounds, footsteps, whispered conversations, the rustling of paper, had ceased completely. Everyone present sensed they were witnessing something unprecedented. Wellington's mind filled with images of his military service. The friends who hadn't come home, the civilians he had helped during humanitarian missions, the oath he had taken to serve his country with honor and dignity. These memories battled against his personal grievances and political disagreements, creating a moment of pure human complexity. The guard's hand reached the halfway point of its journey to his temple. Trump's expression showed deep respect for the soldier's struggle. The president understood that he was asking this man to set aside personal feelings and political differences in favor of military tradition and diplomatic courtesy. It was a heavy request that went far beyond simple ceremony. Palace staff watched with growing anxiety as seconds ticked by without resolution. The entire day's schedule was now meaningless. This single moment had become the defining event of the state visit. Sir Richard Thornbury quietly signaled for the other ceremonies to be delayed, understanding that nothing else would matter until this situation reached its conclusion. Queen Elizabeth II continued observing from her window, her experienced eyes recognizing the historical significance of what was unfolding. She had seen the rise and fall of political leaders, the ebb and flow of international relationships, and the personal struggles of countless individuals caught in the machinery of state. This moment contained elements of all these experiences. Wellington's internal monologue was a whirlwind of competing thoughts. His drill sergeant's voice echoed from training exercises decades ago, demanding perfect military bearing under all circumstances. His brother's face appeared in his mind, wheelchair-bound and struggling with daily tasks that had once been simple. The faces of political leaders who had made promises they never kept flashed before his eyes. The crowd of tourists had stopped taking casual photographs and begun staring openly at the drama unfolding before them. Children asked their parents what was happening, but the adults could only whisper that they were watching something very important, something that would be talked about for years to come. Trump's security detail remained alert but understood that this situation required patience rather than intervention. They had protected the president through countless unpredictable moments, but none quite like this. The peaceful nature of the standoff meant their role was simply to wait and observe while history played out. Journalists around the courtyard were furiously typing notes and adjusting their equipment to capture every possible angle of the encounter. The story was writing itself in real time, and they all understood that their careers would be defined partly by how well they documented this unprecedented moment. Wellington's hand continued its slow journey upward, now 3/4 of the way to completing a proper military salute. The soldier's face remained impassive, but close observers could see the slight tension around his eyes that revealed the enormous effort required to maintain his composure during this internal battle. The weight of tradition, duty, personal conviction, and international diplomacy all balanced on the completion or abandonment of a simple gesture. One man's decision would echo through diplomatic channels, military institutions, and political commentary for months or years to come. The power of individual choice in the face of larger forces was playing out on the world stage. In that final moment, with his hand inches from his temple, Sergeant Wellington made his choice. His fingers stopped moving, trembling slightly in the air between duty and defiance. The weight of his personal convictions, his brother's sacrifice, and the broken promises of politicians proved stronger than military protocol. His hand slowly returned to his side, leaving Trump's salute forever unacknowledged. The sound of camera shutters exploded across the courtyard as photographers captured the moment of decision. Sarah Mitchell's finger pressed the shutter release, creating an image that would become one of the most analyzed photographs in modern political history. The picture showed Trump's maintained salute and Wellington's rigid stance, two men representing different worlds and different values. Trump's face showed a complex mixture of disappointment and understanding. As a businessman and politician, he had faced rejection before, but this moment cut deeper because of its public nature and symbolic weight. Yet something in Wellington's bearing commanded his respect, even in disagreement. The president slowly lowered his hand for the final time, his expression dignified despite the clear rebuff. The silence that followed felt like the pause between lightning and thunder. Everyone present understood they had witnessed something that would be dissected by political commentators, military analysts, and historians for years to come. The relationship between America and Britain had been tested in the most public way possible. Palace officials quickly moved into damage control mode. Sir Richard Thornbury approached both men with diplomatic smoothness, guiding the president toward the palace entrance while simultaneously signaling for Wellington to be relieved of his post. The machinery of international relations began working to minimize the diplomatic fallout from this unprecedented breach of protocol. Wellington was escorted away from the ceremonial line by his commanding officer, his face showing no emotion, but his eyes carrying the weight of his decision. He knew his military career would face serious consequences, but something deep inside him felt lighter than it had in years. He had chosen his convictions over convenience, personal truth over political theater. Trump continued his entrance into Buckingham Palace, but the tone of his entire visit had been fundamentally altered. Palace staff worked frantically to adjust schedules and manage the inevitable media storm. The president's meetings with British officials would now take place under the shadow of this very public moment of disrespect. Sarah Mitchell was already transmitting her photographs to BBC headquarters, knowing she had captured something extraordinary. Her editor called within minutes, recognizing immediately that this story would dominate news cycles around the world. The image of the unacknowledged salute would become shorthand for the complex tensions in modern international relations. Social media exploded with reactions within hours. Military veterans, political activists, diplomacy experts, and ordinary citizens all weighed in on Wellington's decision. Some called him a hero for standing up to what they saw as failed American foreign policy. Others branded him a disgrace to military tradition and an embarrassment to Britain. The Queen's private response to the incident remained unknown to the public, but palace insiders reported that she spent considerable time in private consultation with her advisors. The delicate balance of constitutional monarchy, military tradition, and international diplomacy had been challenged in a way that required careful consideration. Wellington returned to his quarters to find his personal belongings being packed by military police. His decision had cost him his position in the Royal Guard and would likely end his military career entirely. As he held a photograph of his brother in his wheelchair, he felt certain that some principles were worth more than personal security or professional advancement. Trump's administration worked overtime to minimize the political damage from the incident. Press secretaries fielded hundreds of questions about the president's reaction, the state of U.S.-UK relations, and the implications for future diplomatic visits. The carefully crafted narrative of international cooperation had been shattered by one soldier's moment of conscience. Years later, historians would debate whether Wellington's action represented a dangerous breach of military discipline or a courageous stand for personal conviction. The photograph would appear in textbooks about civil-military relations, international diplomacy, and the power of individual conscience in the face of institutional pressure. The moment when a royal guard refused to salute the President of the United States became more than just a news story. It became a symbol of the complex tensions between personal beliefs and public duty, between individual conscience and institutional loyalty, between the weight of the past and the demands of the present. In choosing to keep his hand at his side, Wellington had created a moment that would echo through history long after both men had left the public stage.